So a physical law is a statement about how things do in fact behave, and a theory is the explanation as to why they behave in that way. For example, the law of universal gravitation says that every particle of matter attracts every other particle of matter with a gravitational force whose magnitude is directly proportional to the product of the masses of the particles and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. The best explanation of why bodies behave like this is Einstein's general theory of relativity. This says that the geometric curvature of space-time is what causes masses to move towards each other. Masses and other sources of gravity determine that curvature of space-time, and moving bodies respond to that curvature, giving rise to the appearance of a gravitational force. So the laws describe how the gravitational force changes with mass and distance, and the theory explains where that apparent gravitational force comes from. All science is done to solve problems that arise from observations that do not fit with the current understanding of the universe. It generates explanations that can be extrapolated to generate testable implications. The minimum required in order to generate scientific knowledge is evidence, that is to say, some observable events and the application of reason. So to create a scientific law, you need to make some measurements and then accurately and usually mathematically describe the relationship between one set of measurements and another set of measurements. The accuracy of your law is as good as your measurements. To create an explanation of what is going on is far harder, but if it's right, it can be a source of new knowledge and new predictions about other things that are related to it. Further to this, if any part of the law or explanation were arbitrarily changed, it would conflict with those observations and so be thrown out as a bad description or explanation of those observations. Good explanations then are hard to vary because they're constrained by reality. Both laws and theories are subject to experiment. If you make a measurement that contradicts the law or a theory, you know that it is incorrect. This is contrasted with human laws, where, for example, if someone breaks a human law, they're in the wrong, and you put that person into prison. In science, if a body or some observation breaks a physical law, then it's the law that gets punished and thrown out. Reality is king with science. So the explanation or the interpretation of the observation is checked against reality. A good physical law, then, is one which accurately describes reality. A good theory is one which accurately explains the observations made and can be extrapolated to produce some testable implication and is hard to vary. Science then progresses in this way. An explanation is devised which tests the implications of an explanation. If the predictions are confirmed, it's a good and useful theory. When they are contradicted, it's a useless theory. You throw it out, you move on, and you try and come up with a new explanation that, as an absolute minimum, doesn't contradict reality. Each new theory that passes this basic threshold is then thoroughly investigated by other scientists, experts, and critics from all fields who try their hardest to disprove it. If it survives that attack, it is deemed to be a good explanation. If it doesn't, it's thrown away. This rigorous and relentless routing out of bad explanations has resulted in our current understanding of the universe. To date, there has been no observation which has contradicted the three most tested scientific theories, which are the general theory of relativity, quantum theory, and the theory of evolution by natural selection. All three of these theories have made predictions which have been tested time and time again and used to confirm and create new ideas and knowledge which have led to discoveries and new technologies that have improved the quality and duration of the lives of everyone. Religious ideas aren't constrained by reality and as such are indistinguishable from any other fiction and are rendered entirely useless as a result as a source of knowledge. There is nothing in religion that would help discover how the universe works, and in many respects would actually hinder any attempt to discover it. Taken literally, The Bible is nothing more than a source of utter nonsense. It provides no explanation for anything beyond God did it, which is just to say something must have caused it, therefore God must have caused it. This insight truly is as useless as it sounds. But the theists claim theology has moved on. You have to interpret the Bible for it not to look quite so insane. Interpretation in the theistic sense consists of generating an explanation for why the biblical wording appears to contradict our ever-improving understanding of reality. However, this form of interpretation does zero, absolutely zero, to advance our understanding of the universe. This is because the problem with any interpretation is knowing when you've got the right one. Science does this by experiment. Religion does not, and each and every interpretation only ever satisfies the views of its interpreter, with no test available or instructions in the book itself about how to differentiate between good and bad interpretations. The current Jehovah's Witness view of the creation is that the creation of the universe and the earth did not occur over 6 24-hour days. Rather, this is a mistaken translation of a Hebrew word, which, according to them, was used to cover a vague period of time. They do this to agree that the universe is several billion years old. Good points for that. Allowing them to claim in the process that science no longer contradicts the Bible. Not quite. Now, putting aside the uselessness of a word which could be used to describe any period of time between 1 day and about 2 billion years, it does show that they're at least trying to bring their stories in line with reality. Note that doing this doesn't affect the current understanding of the age of the universe, nor is it possible to infer the correct age of the universe from the uninterpreted Bible. All interpretations of religious texts are of this sort. The interpreter finds something that it doesn't fit with their current understanding and then invents some reason, be it a poor translation of the Sanskrit word for rape or just plain deus ex machina, to show that the Bible, read in the light of current moral and scientific understanding, was always right in the first place. It was merely fallible and stupid humans who were reading it wrong. When science wants to check its interpretation of evidence, it performs experiments on the predictions of extrapolations to check that the interpretation underpinning it is correct. Religion changes the way you read it until you happen upon an interpretation that isn't totally embarrassing. It can then claim, look, it's all correct and relevant, so yay, God must be real. It really is as stupid as it sounds. And the problem remains that no useful knowledge can be gleaned from its pages without already knowing the answer that you're trying to get to in advance. And that's why science, as a source of knowledge, is more useful than religion. Religion is and always has been parasitic on knowledge from external sources. It does this to seem authoritative, so that the yokels will be impressed and accept its supernatural claims and their earthly implications without question, that the ill-educated will be impressed enough not to notice that the Trojan horse is nothing more than a cheap piñata filled with horseshit. There is no scientific theory which does or could require the supernatural to work. This is because the supernatural is irrelevant to science and knowledge generally. To conclude an observation has a supernatural cause is to claim that something which has been observed as happening in nature could not possibly have occurred in nature. Now, since our understanding of what can and can't happen in nature is merely a product of theory, and since the golden rule of science is to throw out any theory which is contradicted by reality, it's impossible ever to conclude a supernatural cause for anything. Therefore, there is no experiment which could prove the supernatural. God, if it exists, and if it can influence anything observable, must be entirely contained within nature. This is to say, this isn't to say anything particularly groundbreaking, only that science accepts any event which does happen in nature must necessarily be able to happen in nature in the first place. Only to the extent, of course, that it can be shown to have actually happened, of course. This is why science is so useful. It can identify new problems, formulate accurate descriptions, and gives a method for eliminating bad explanations. The fruits of science have brought unquestioned benefits to the lives and the humanity of everyone on Earth. Meanwhile, religion tries to peddle irrelevant assertions on baseless assumptions by appealing to 17th century typos and a pervasive ignorance of evolution to convince everybody that gay marriage is bad. And they are free to continue doing so. I encourage them to carry on updating the perfect and unchanging word of the Lord to seem more rational and reasonable. This is what education is. Thanks to science's insistence on evidence and experiment and religion's ever-dwindling authority, biblical interpretation will continue to be in this direction. Soon they'll be telling us in great detail how the Gospel of John shows, and has always shown, that Jesus said homophobia was every bit as wrong as racism and slavery was, and no one but crazed fundamentalists will have ever believed that Adam and Eve existed. I don't know is the beginning of knowledge. God did it, is to give up before you start. But don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it. You have access to all the knowledge in the world via the internet. Just make sure you have a reliable method of discerning reality from fantasy. Thank you for listening.